welcome to this explainer. Let's jump right in. Imagine pulling up a tomato plant at the end of the summer, and the root ball is just so incredibly dense and fibrous that it looks completely different from anything you've ever grown before. Well, this isn't just some backyard garden myth. It's a real biological process documented in peer-reviewed agricultural science. Today, we're diving into a $1 pantry staple that has actually been proven to double or even triple plant root mass. It's sitting in nearly every kitchen in America right now, and yet it goes completely unnoticed by most gardeners.
So, naturally, you gotta be asking yourself, if this stuff works so incredibly well to build massive roots, why isn't it just sitting right there on a garden center shelf next to those expensive synthetic rooting powders, right? We're all kind of trained to look up at the leaves and the flowers, and we buy these colorful bottles of liquid fertilizer to spray on top of the soil. But the true engine of the plant lives entirely underground. So if there's a natural $1 solution that directly upgrades that root engine, why can't you just walk into a store and buy a premixed bottle of it?
Well, the answer actually comes down to basic physics and shelf life. See, those expensive little plastic tubs of synthetic rooting powder at the store, they're dead. They are highly stable and they can sit in a hot warehouse for months on end. But our $1 pantry staple is a living, breathing fungus. The second it's awakened in water, it springs to life and starts releasing carbon dioxide gas. Within 48 hours, a sealed plastic bottle of this living solution would literally bulge, leak, or just spectacularly explode right on a retail shelf. It has to be alive and active to work, and that physical reality makes it practically impossible to package and sell commercially.
All right, let's look at the star of the show, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, or just plain old dry baker's yeast. For generations, grandmothers have used this exact single-celled fungus to make bread rise in farm kitchens. But it has a second, completely different biological purpose when you introduce it to the soil. And this is the crazy part. We are not talking about some specialized, hard-to-find agricultural product. We're talking about the exact same little packets you can grab in the baking aisle for under $1. And what it does below the soil line is absolutely extraordinary.
When you introduce this living fungus to the root zone, it basically does three incredible things simultaneously to supercharge growth from the bottom up. It doesn't just drop off basic nutrients like a standard fertilizer, it actively alters the whole biological environment of the soil. It signals the roots to grow, it serves up a highly bioavailable feast of minerals, and it physically defends the plant against disease. Let's actually break down exactly how each of these three mechanisms works on a microscopic level.
First up, hormone signaling. While synthetic store-bought powders try to mimic root hormones in a lab, living yeast naturally produces the real deal. It secretes something called IAA, which is essentially the master signaling hormone in the plant kingdom that literally tells a root to stretch out and push out new tips. On top of that, it produces cytokinins, which is a second class of hormone that tells cells to multiply faster, creating all those dense lateral root branches.
Second, it's a microbial feast. As the yeast multiplies, it's releasing amino acids, B vitamins, and trace minerals like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium directly into the soil. Because all of these are already pre-digested by the yeast, it acts like a direct intravenous feed that the root hairs can absorb right on contact. And on top of all that, it provides physical defense. The yeast actively colonizes the root zone, literally taking up the space so harmful soil-borne pathogens can't move in, all while secreting antimicrobial peptides to protect your young plant.
Okay, so we know the yeast is down there producing hormones and releasing trace minerals, but how do the roots actually take advantage of this? For over a century, textbooks taught us that plant roots were entirely passive, like simple drinking straws that just sipped dissolved minerals from the damp earth. Well, that assumption brings us to a mind-bending agricultural discovery from 2010 that completely rewrote our understanding of plant biology and nutrient absorption.
This absolutely changes everything we thought we knew about gardening. Under a laser microscope, an Australian research team watched a process called the Rhizophagy cycle, which translates literally to root eating. They proved that root tips actually engulf living yeast cells, pull them right inside their own tissue, and use a mild oxidative pulse to strip away the nutrients. Then, and this is the wild part, they spit the surviving yeast cells back out into the soil to gather more nutrients and start the whole cycle all over again.
And look, this brilliantly illustrates that this isn't just internet folklore. Peer-reviewed agricultural labs are consistently measuring massive gains when living yeast is applied to the root zone. A 2014 study in Crop Science showed higher root biomass and elevated nitrogen and phosphorus in tomatoes and sugarcane. A 2023 study in the journal Plants showed a 1.5 times increase in height and root length for maize. And just recently in 2024, researchers saw improved germination, chlorophyll, and fresh weight in lettuce and tomatoes. These are real, measurable results from rigorous scientific environments.
All right, let's get into the 30-minute recipe.
So, how do we actually harness this powerful biology at home? Well, you don't need a lab and you don't need expensive equipment. For under a single dollar, you just need 3 basic items to build your biological inoculant. First, 1 liter of non-chlorinated water. Second, 2 tablespoons of plain dry baker's yeast. That's about 20 grams or 2 standard packets. And finally, 1 tablespoon of plain white sugar. That is it. Depending on the brand of yeast you buy, this entire biological powerhouse is going to cost you somewhere between 60 cents and $1. Okay, here's how it all comes together. First, your water must be warm. Pour it into a large glass jar and gently dissolve your yeast and sugar. Then, and this is highly important, do not seal the jar with a tight lid. Cover it with a breathable paper towel and just secure it with a rubber band. This keeps the bugs out, but lets all that expanding carbon dioxide gas safely escape. Finally, place the jar in a dark corner or a closed cabinet and just wait 30 to 40 minutes.
Now, a quick aside here, because a lot of people get confused by this, which is fair. Plant roots have absolutely zero use for refined white sugar. The sugar is not plant food. Remember, the dry yeast is dormant, so that sugar acts as its biological wake-up signal. During that 30 to 40-minute wait time, the fungus is going to consume almost all of that sugar to rapidly multiply and produce those vital hormones and amino acids. By the time this hits your soil, the sugar is essentially gone.
Okay, absolutely crucial warning about temperature here. Your water must be precisely between 105 and 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Honestly, this is the step where most home attempts just quietly fail before they even start. If the water is too cool, the yeast simply stays asleep and the brew is flat. If the water is boiling hot, you kill the yeast on contact. A great cheat is the wrist test. The water should feel comfortably warm against the back of your wrist, but not hot enough to make you flinch.
So 40 minutes go by and you're going to see this thick, foamy, beige cap on the surface of your water, and you'll smell a mild bread-like aroma. Now, this concentrate is fully alive, but it is way too strong to pour directly onto a plant. You absolutely must dilute 1 part of this powerful brew with 10 parts of plain, non-chlorinated water. If you skip this dilution step, the dense yeast population is going to cause sudden osmotic stress to the fine root hairs of your plant, and you'll end up doing more harm than good.
Now, to build that massive root engine, you don't want to just pour this on every single week like a standard fertilizer. It's a strategic bio-stimulant. You want to pour your diluted mix directly onto the soil, not the leaves, at 3 distinct milestones. First, right at transplant to reduce shock and encourage lateral branching. Second, at the very first sign of flowering, which is when the plant decides its fruit capacity. And third, when the first small fruits actually appear and the plant needs a heavy nutrient load to swell them up.
Before you go try this, let's quickly cover a few common mistakes that'll just quietly ruin the whole brew. We already mentioned hot water, but please remember, never use a tightly sealed lid. The gas pressure will literally crack a glass jar right on your counter. Make sure your yeast isn't expired. If it's over 2 years old, it's dead and it won't foam. You also must use the mixture within 24 hours, or the fermentation tips into alcohol production, which harms roots. And finally, only apply this to the soil in the cool early morning or late evening, never in the midday heat.
As we wrap up this explainer, you really got to step back and look at the sheer brilliance of nature. By taking a $1 ingredient, waking it up with a little warm water and sugar, and timing its application perfectly, you are literally replicating cutting-edge agricultural science right in your own backyard. It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other incredible science-backed tools are just hiding right inside our pantries, waiting to be unlocked by a little bit of biology? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.